man. Whoa, that was close. I had to find... Do you like this top? I think the bonnet goes with this. I had to find my bonnet. I had to get a drink. Pineapple juice. It's very good for you. All right. I had to get my snacks. Oh, here we go. People logging in, baby. Logging in. Hey there. Yeah, y'all log in. So I got some cookies, and I got my and I have Sock Monkey is here. Sock Monkey is here, and yeah, Sock Monkey here. And what do I have? I have the book. Now we're still on Little House in the Big Woods. Still on Little House and the Big Woods. Still Little House in the Big Woods. And what's awesome is we're going to be going to Farmer Boy soon. We will be going to Farmer Boy. And when we get to Farmer Boy, I have heard back from Mr. Dean Butler, Al Manso himself. And he indeed has agreed to read some of Farmer Boy. He's in Florida right now, and things are crazy. And he's getting his book. So he said, like, next week, I don't know, Monday, Tuesday, I'll probably start Farmer Boy, which is fine, because there's that chapter about pie that I really like. I really like the thing about the pie. So, yes, get yourself comfortable, and we will finish up Little House in the Big Woods. Maybe we might finish it today. We could finish it today. So, I have juice, I have snack. Yes, the bonnets. Indeed, the bonnets. Yes, we shall have the bonnets. I had to order some more. I ordered some more, and they're on their way. So if you've got a bunch are packed up and ready to go and are going out, and others are on their way here for me to sign to you, because people were like, I want a bonnet. No, I need to bonnet. I need a bonnet and a book, and I need a book and a photo and a thing. So we're doing that. So make yourselves comfortable. And it's chapter 12 today, which is page 212, if you're reading along Little House in the Big Woods. The Wonderful Machine. Do you like this top? Because you can get, it's my friend Jimmy Martin in France. He has like a whole clothing line, a whole store, Style Elegance. And you can find it, you go on Instagram and you look for Style Elegance, and you can get clothes from Mr. Jimmy. And you can look like this too. Wonderful Machine. Next day, Pa cut the heads from several bundles of the oats. Because remember, they're making the things, the shocks of oats and stuff. And brought the clean, bright yellow straws to Ma. She put them in a tub of water to soften them and keep them soft. Then she sat in the chair by the side of the tub and braided the straws. She took up several of them, knotted their ends together, and began to braid. The straws were different lengths, and when she came near the end of one straw, she put a new long one from the tub in its place and went on braiding. She let the end of the braid fall back into the water and kept on braiding till she had many yards of braid. All her spare time for days, she was braiding straws. She made a fine, narrow, smooth braid using 7 of the small straws. She used 9 larger straws for a wider braid and made it notched all along the edges. And from the very largest straws, she made the widest braid of all. Now, I'm kind of like, what exactly? Oh, what? I'm sitting on my coffee table. What is she doing? What is she making with all this braid? And why do they have to be different sizes? What the heck is Ma making? Because I have no clue. Braid, 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 braid. When all the straws were braided, she threaded a needle with strong white thread, and beginning at the end of a braid, she sewed it round and round, holding the braid so it would lie flat after it was sewed. This made a little mat, and Ma said it was the top of the crown of a hat. It's the hat. She's making hats. Oh, give her little hats. Then she held the braid tighter on one edge and kept on sewing it around and around. The braid drew in and made the sides of the crown. When the crown was high enough, Ma held the braid loosely again as she kept on sewing around, and the braid lay flat, and that was the hat brim. When the brim was wide enough, Ma cut the braid and sewed the end fast so that it could not unbraid itself, because the hat would unwind and be terrible. Can't have that. Ma sewed hats for Mary and Laura of the finest, narrowest braid. For Pa and for herself, she made hats of the wider, notched braid. That was Pa's Sunday hat. Then she made him 2 everyday hats of the coarse, widest braid. Now, they don't have a lot of clothes. They had like the Sunday best, and they had the everyday, and they had kind of the overall things. And now, suddenly, he has a hat for every day. And she hats. Hats. So there you go, hats, many hats. So when she finished this, Ma set it on a board to dry, shaping it nicely. She did so, and when it dried, it stayed in the shape she gave it. Ma could make beautiful hats. Of course she could. Laura liked to watch her, and she learned how to braid the straw and made a little hat for Charlotte. The days were growing shorter, and the nights were cooler. One night, Jack Frost passed by, and in the morning there were bright colors here and there among the green leaves of the big woods. Then all the leaves stopped being green. They were yellow and scarlet and crimson and golden and brown. Now remember, early in this book it was winter, and it was all about Jack Frost on the windows. Yes. Along the rail fence, the sumac. They had sumac? I'm in California. I got sumac. We got sumac like for days here. Sumac, apparently, was the thing. Along the fence, the sumac held up its dark red cones of berries above bright flame-colored leaves. Acorns were falling from the oaks, and Laura and Mary made little acorn cups and saucers for the playhouses. Walnuts and hickory nuts were dropping to the ground in the big woods, and squirrels were scampering busily everywhere, gathering their winter store of nuts and hiding them away in hollow trees. Yes. Laura and Mary went with Ma to gather walnuts and hickory nuts and hazelnuts. They spread them in the sun to dry, then they beat off the dried outer hulls and stored the nuts in the attic for winter. Very smart. It was fun to gather the large round walnuts and the smaller hickory nuts and the little hazelnuts that grew in bunches on the bushes. The soft outer hulls of the walnuts were full of a brown juice that stained their hands. Ew. But the hazelnut hulls smelled good and tasted good too. When Laura used her teeth to pry a nut loose, it's not like she could go to the dentist if her tooth broke, so that's probably a dangerous thing to do. Everyone was busy now, for all the garden vegetables must be stored away. Laura and Mary helped, picking up the dusty potatoes after Pa had dug them from the ground, and pulling the long yellow carrots and the round purple-topped turnips, and they helped Ma cook the pumpkin for pumpkin pies. With the butcher knife, Ma cut the big orange-colored pumpkins into halves. She cleaned the seeds out of the center and cut the pumpkin into long slices from which she pared the rind. Laura helped her cut the slices into cubes. Ma put the cubes into the big iron pot on the stove, poured in some water, and then watched while the pumpkin slowly boiled down all day long. All the water and the juice must be boiled away, and the pumpkin must never burn. The pumpkin was a thick, dark, good-smelling mass in the kettle. Blah, blah. It did not boil like water, but bubbles came up in it and suddenly exploded, leaving holes that closed quickly. Every time a bubble exploded, the rich, hot pumpkin smell came out. Yum! It sounds gooey and delicious. Laura stood on a chair and watched the pumpkin for Ma and stirred it with a wooden paddle. She held the paddle in both hands and stirred carefully, because if the pumpkin burned, there wouldn't be any pumpkin pies. Crises. For dinner, they ate the stewed pumpkin with their bread. Oh, so she didn't make pie right away. She literally took this stewed pumpkin that she had made, and she served it as an actual meal, a dinner thing. And, oh, and Sarah's going on about hickory nuts. See, you're getting all your prairie education in the comments. If I don't know something, they do. And there's people commenting going, well, actually, when you pick hickory nuts. So you're getting all your scoop totally in the comments. It's so educational. Pumpkin, exploding pumpkin. So they ate this pumpkin, and they made it into pretty shapes on their plates. Ooh, it was a beautiful color, and it smoothed and molded so prettily with their knives. Ma never allowed them to play with their food at table. They must always eat nicely everything that was set before them, leaving nothing on their plates. But she did let them make the rich brown stewed pumpkin into pretty shapes before they ate it. Yay! Pumpkin, the one time you're allowed to play with your food. Okay, so right there, that's good. At other times, they had baked Hubbard squash for dinner. The rind was so hard that Ma had to take Pa's axe to cut the squash into pieces. When the pieces were baked in the oven, Laura loved to spread the soft insides with butter, then scoop the yellow flesh from the rind and eat it. I like squash. For supper now, they often had hulled corn and milk. Okay, getting hungry, completely need a cookie. Okay. I love it whole corn. Hulled corn. Yummers. Hulled corn. Now that was good too. It was so good that Laura could hardly wait for the corn to be ready after Ma started to hull it. It took 2 or 3 days to make hulled corn. The first day, Ma cleaned and brushed all the ashes out of the cook stove. Then she burned some clean, bright hardwood and saved its ashes. She put the hardwood ashes in a little cloth bag. That night, Pa brought in some ears of corn with large, plump kernels. He nubbed the ears, shelling off the small, chaffy kernels at their tips. Then he shelled the rest into a large pan until the pan was full. So not the little itty-bitty stuff at the end of the ear, the big, thick kernels. That's the ones you want. Early next day, Ma put the shelled corn and the bag of ashes into the big iron kettle. She filled the kettle with water and kept it boiling a long time. At last, the kernels of corn began to swell, and they swelled and swelled until their skins split open and began to peel off. When every skin was loose and peeling, Ma lugged the heavy kettle outdoors. She filled a clean wash tub with cold water from the spring, and she dipped the corn out of the kettle into the tub. Then she rolled the sleeves of her flowered calico dress. Oh, look, flowered calico dress. She rolled the sleeves above her elbows of her flowered calico dress. And she knelt by the tub. With her hands, she rubbed and scrubbed the corn till the hulls came off and floated on top of the water. Often she poured the water off and filled the tub again with buckets of water from the spring. She kept on rubbing and scrubbing the corn between her hands and changing the water until every hull came off and was washed away. Ma looked pretty, with her bare arms, plump and white, her cheeks so red and her dark hair smooth and shining, while she scrubbed and rubbed the corn in the clear water. She never splashed one drop of water on her pretty dress. Oh, I couldn't do that. I would have corn and water and ashes all over the place. Hey, Canada. Yeah, the Canadians are here. So she never got any of this on her dress, which is amazing. When at last the corn was done, Ma put all the soft white kernels in a big jar in the pantry. Then at last they had whole corn and milk for supper. Sometimes they had whole corn for breakfast. With maple syrup. Yay! Maple syrup again. And sometimes Ma fried the soft kernels with pork drippings. But Laura liked them best with milk. Autumn was great fun. There was so much work to do, so many good things to eat, so many new things to see. Laura was scampering and chattering like the squirrels from morning to night. One frosty morning, a machine came up the road. 4 horses were pulling it, and 2 men were on it. The horses hauled it up into the field where Pa and Uncle Henry and Grandpa and Mr. Peterson had stacked their wheat. 2 more men drove after it, another, smaller machine. Pa called to Ma that the threshers had come. Then he hurried out to the field with his team. Laura and Mary asked Ma, and then they ran out in the field after him. They might watch, if they were careful, and not to get in the way. Uncle Henry came riding up and tied his horse to a tree. Always trouble when Uncle Henry is here, yes. Then he and Pa hitched all the other horses, 8 of them, to the smaller machine. They hitched each team to the end of a long stick that came out from the center of the machine. A long iron rod lay along the ground from this machine to the big machine. Afterward, Laura and Mary asked questions, and Pa told them that the big machine was called the separator, and the rod was called the tumbling rod, and the little machine was called the horsepower. Sounding familiar. 8 horses were hitched to it and made it go, so this was an 8-horsepower machine. A man sat on top of the horsepower, and when everything was ready, he clicked to the horses, and they began to go. And you're like, wait, is there a picture? There must be a picture of this. Of course there is. Yes, look, there he is, and that's, see, the horsepower, little mill, and then they're doing the thing with the separator. See, there's the thing there. See, there it is. Fascinating. So he sits on this, and the horses go, and they walked around him in a circle, each team pulling on the long stick to which it was hitched, and following the team ahead. As they went around, they stepped carefully over the tumbling rod, which was tumbling over and over on the ground. Because that's what tumbling does. Their pulling made the tumbling rod keep rolling over, and the rod moved the machinery of the separator, which stood beside the stack of wheat. All this machinery made an enormous racket, rackety banging and clanging. Laura and Mary held tight to each other's hand at the edge of the field and watched with all their eyes. Watched with all their eyes. How many did they have? Okay. They had never seen a machine before. They had never heard such a racket. Pa and Uncle Henry, on top of the wheat stack, were pitching bundles down onto a board. A man stood at the board and cut the bands on the bundles and crowded the bundles one at a time into a hole at the end of the separator. The hole looked like the separator's mouth, and it had long iron teeth. Arr! The teeth were chewing. They chewed the bundles, and the separator swallowed them. Straw blew out at the separator's other end, and wheat poured out of its side. 2 men were working fast, trampling the straw and bundling it into a stack. One man was working fast, sacking the pouring grain. The grains of wheat poured out of the separator into a half-bushel measure, and as fast as the measure filled, the man slipped an empty one into its place and emptied the full one into a sack. He had just time to empty it and slip it back under the spout before the other measure ran over. All the men were working as fast as they possibly could, but the machine kept right up with them. Laura and Mary were so excited they could hardly breathe. They held hands tightly and stared. The horses walked around and around. The man who was driving them cracked his whip and shouted, "Giddy up there, John!" "No use trying to shirk." Crack went the whip. "Careful there, Billy. Easy, boy. Ya can't go but so fast nohow." This is how you talk to horses when they're going around in a threshing thing here. The separator swallowed the bundles, and the golden straw blew out in a golden cloud. The wheat streamed golden brown out of the spout, while the men hurried. Pa and Uncle Henry pitched bundles down as fast as they could, and chaff and dust blew over everything. Laura and Mary watched as long as they could. Then they ran back to the house to help Ma get dinner for all those men. A big kettle of cabbage and meat was boiling on the stove. A big pan of beans and a Johnny cake were baking in the oven. Laura and Mary set the table for the threshers. They put on salt-rising bread, salt-rising bread, and butter, bowls of stewed pumpkin, pumpkin pies, and dried berry pies, and cookies, and cheese, and honey, and pitchers of milk. Cookies. This is awesome. Milk. Then Mama put on the boiled potatoes and cabbage and meat, the baked beans, the hot Johnny cake, and the baked Hubbard squash, and she poured the tea. Laura always wondered why bread of cornmeal was called Johnny cake. It wasn't cake. Ma didn't know unless the northern the Northern soldiers, hurrah, Civil War, Northern soldiers, called it Johnny cake because the people in the South, where they fought, ate so much of it. They called the Southern soldiers Johnny Reb. Aha, maybe they call the Southern bread cake, just for fun. Well, because if you've had cornbread, it's quite sweet. It shouldn't be too sweet. In fact, if it's too sweet, it's what they call Yankee cornbread, because it's like too sweet. If it's good Southern cornbread, it should be buttery. Yeah. But there you go. So Civil War, Johnny cake, Johnny Reb. Ma had heard some say it should be called journey cake. She didn't know. It wouldn't be a very good bread to take on a journey. You know, it crumbles. It's not good. At noon, the threshers came in to the table loaded with food. But there was none too much for threshers. Threshers work hard and get very hungry. By the middle of the afternoon, the machines had finished all the threshing, and the men who owned them drove them away into the big woods, taking with them the sacks of wheat that were their pay. They were going to the next place where neighbors had stacked their wheat and wanted the machines to thresh it. Pa was very tired that night, but he was happy. He said to Ma, "It would have taken Henry and Peterson and Pa and me a couple of weeks apiece to thresh as much grain with flails as that machine threshed today. We wouldn't have got as much wheat either, and it wouldn't have been as clean. That machine's a great invention," he said. "Other folks can stick to old-fashioned ways if they want to, but I'm all for progress." Okay, so this is 1874, and everyone who loves these books goes on and on about how it's about the 1800s and the 80s, and it's so old-fashioned, and it's not like our modern ways. And what does Pa say? Yay! Yay, machines! Yes, modern times. I'm all for progress. It's a great age we're living in. As long as I raise wheat, I'm going to have a machine come and thresh it, if there's one anywhere in the neighborhood. So, no, unlike people who read these books go, I want to do it by hand. Pa, he was saying, I can get by hand. Why would I do it by hand? Oh, they've invented a machine. Yeah, hello. So, obviously, if they'd offered him, like, cars and electricity and a stove, he would have said, awesome. So, yes, the romanticization of the 1800s, Pa was like, no, machines good. Progress, yes. He was too tired that night to talk to Laura, but Laura was proud of him. It was Pa who had got the other men to stack their wheat together and send for the threshing machine, and it was a wonderful machine. Everybody was glad it had come. Yay! So, that's awesome. Even in the 1800s, they knew if you could get a machine to do it. So, should I go for it? Or we should do it. It's the last chapter. It's the Deer in the Wood, and the Deer in the Wood is the last chapter of this book. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this, and tomorrow is, where am I? Tomorrow's Friday, and I'm gonna start Farmer Boy. I'm gonna do it. But then Manly himself, Amanda Wilder from the TV show, Mr. Dean Butler, will be joining us soon to read sections from Farmer Boy. Meanwhile, the deer in the wood. The grass was dry and withered, and the cows must be taken out of the woods and kept in the barn to be fed. All the bright-colored leaves became dull brown when the cold fall rains began. There was no more playing under the trees, but Pa was in the house when it rained, and he began again to play the fiddle after supper. Oh no, just the fiddle again. Then the rain stopped. The weather grew colder. In the early mornings, everything sparkled with frost. The days were growing short, and a little fire burned all day in the cook stove to keep the house warm. Winter was not far away. The attic and the cellar were full of good things once more, and Laura and Mary had started to make patchwork quilts. Everything was beginning to be snug and cozy again. One night, when he came in from doing the chores, Pa said that after supper he would go to his deer lick and watch for a deer. There had been no fresh meat in the little house in spring, but now the fawns were grown up, and Pa would go hunting again. The fawns are grown up, so Pa can kill them now. Oh, deer lick. Do you know what a deer lick is? I didn't know. A deer lick is, I've seen them in the forest. You know what it is? It's the Ingles' favorite thing. It's a giant block of salt. Yes, salt. Again with the salt. And they put it out in the woods, and the deer love this. And it's good for them, because they actually need to get a little salt, because they don't have, like, crackers in their diet. So they lick the salt lick. But hunters will, they will put one out so that to draw the deer in so that they can, shoot them. So get the salt lick out. So sorry, but there you go. Pa had made a deer lick in an open place in the woods with trees nearby in which he could sit to watch it. A deer lick was a place where the deer came to get, what's the word? Salt! When they found a salty place in the ground, they came there to lick it, and that was called a deer lick. Pa had made one by sprinkling salt over the ground. Oh, he just dumped some out. He didn't even do like a block. He just dumped it out, because, as we know, the Ingles really dig their salt, so he kept some. After supper, Pa took his gun and went into the woods, and Laura and Mary went to sleep without any stories or music. As soon as they woke in the morning, they ran to the window, but there was no deer hanging in the trees. Pa had never before gone out to get a deer and come home without one. Laura and Mary did not know what to think. All day, Pa was busy, banking the little house in the barn with dead leaves and straw, held down by stones to keep out the cold. Yes, look, he's making piles of things all around the base of the little house to keep the cold out. The weather grew colder all day, and that night there was once more fire on the hearth, and the windows were shut tight and chinked for the winter. After supper, Pa took Laura on his knee while Mary sat close in her little chair. You know, that stuff around the base, my father grew up on a farm. I'm always this my father who grew up on the farm, but my father who grew up on the farm said that in Saskatchewan, Mozart, Saskatchewan, Canada. That's my dad. It was really cold. It was Saskatchewan, it's the prairie in Canada. So they had this huge farmhouse, and they would actually take cow manure, which they had a lot of, and paper, like brown paper, and they would put it all around the bottom of the outside of the house. Ew, not the inside, the outside of the house, the baseboard, and put paper over it, and then pack the snow around it. And this created a seal, a barrier, insulation, primitive insulation to keep them from freezing to death. Also, the cow manure would kind of decompose, and it created heat. So now you know. It's very, very clever. So now Pa's got the girls on their lap again and says, Pa said, now, I'll tell you why you had no fresh meat today. When I went out to the deer lick, I climbed up into a big oak tree. I found a place on a branch where I was comfortable and could watch the deer lick. I was near enough to shoot any animal that came to it, and my gun was loaded and ready on my knee. There I sat and waited for the moon to rise and light the clearing. I was a little tired from the chopping wood all day yesterday, and I must have fallen asleep, for I found myself opening my eyes. The big round moon was just rising. I could see it between the bare branches of the trees low in the sky, and right against it I saw a deer standing. His head was up, and he was listening. His great branching horns stood out one above his head. His antlers, giant antlers. He was dark against the moon. A silhouette of like the king of the deer, basically. Giant king of the deer with monster antlers. Pineapple juice. It was a perfect shot. Uh-oh. But he was so beautiful. He looked so strong and free and wild that I couldn't kill him. I sat there and looked at him until he bounded away into the dark woods. Then I remembered that Ma and my little girls were waiting for me to bring home some good fresh venison. I made up my mind the next time I would shoot. After a while, a big bear came lumbering out into the open. Bears! Okay. He was so fat from feasting on berries and roots and grubs all summer that he was nearly as large as 2 bears. His head swayed from side to side as he went on all fours across the clear space in the moonlight until he came to a rotten log. He smelled it and listened. Then he pawed it apart and sniffed among the broken pieces, eating up the fat white grubs. Ugh. So now we got bears eating worms and grubs and things. Ew. Then he stood up on his hind legs, perfectly still, pineapple juice, perfectly still, looking all around him. He seemed to be suspicious that something was wrong. He was trying to see or smell what it was. He was a perfect mark to shoot at, but I was so much interested in watching him, and the woods were so peaceful in the moonlight, that I forgot all about my gun. I did not even think of shooting him until he was waddling away into the woods. Well, this will never do, I thought. I'll never get any meat this way. I settled myself into the tree and waited again. This time, I was determined to shoot the next game I saw. The moon had risen higher, and the moonlight was bright in a little open place. All around it, the shadows were dark among the trees. After a long while, a doe and her yearling fawn came stepping daintily out of the shadows. They were not afraid at all. They walked over to the place where I had sprinkled the salt, and they both licked up a little bit of it. Then they raised their heads and looked at each other. The fawn stepped over and stood beside the doe. They stood there together, looking at the woods and the moonlight. Their large eyes were shining and soft. Steer. I just sat there, looking at them, until they walked away among the shadows. Then I climbed down out of the tree and came home. Laura whispered in his ear, I'm glad you didn't shoot them. Mary said, we can eat bread and butter. Pa lifted Mary up out of her chair and hugged them both together. You're my good girls, he said, and now it's bedtime. Run along while I get my fiddle. When Laura and Mary had said their prayers and were tucked snugly under the trundle bed's covers, Pa was sitting in the firelight with the fiddle. Ma had blown out the lamp because she did not need its light. On the other side of the hearth, she was swaying gently in her rocking chair, and her knitting needles flashed in and out above the sock she was knitting. The long winter evening of firelight and music had come again. Pa's fiddle wailed while Pa was singing. Oh, goody, he sings something nice, yes. Oh, Susanna, don't you cry for me. I'm going to California, the gold dust for to see. Oh, Susanna, we know that one. Then Pa began to play again the song about old Grimes, but he did not sing the words he'd sung when Ma was making cheese. These words were different. Pa's strong, sweet voice was softly singing. And when I sang about old Grimes, who starved because his wife made skim milk cheese, someone in the comments said, hey, you know, that's Auld Lang Syne. It's the New Year's song. And so Pa sang, shall old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and the days of Auld Lang Syne? Days of Auld Lang Syne, my friend, days of Auld Lang Syne. And I should know this and be able to sing it because my mother was Scottish. My grandfather was named Lachlan Macmillan. I should sing it, but I'm terrible. Should old acquaintance be forgot and the days of Auld Lang Syne? When the fiddle had stopped singing, Laura called out softly, what are the days of Auld Lang Syne, Pa? They're the days of a long time ago, Laura, Pa said. Go to sleep now. But Laura lay awake a little while, listening to Pa's fiddle softly playing and to the lonely sound of the wind in the big woods. She looked at Pa, sitting on the bench by the hearth, the firelight gleaming on his brown hair and beard and glistening on the honey-brown fiddle. She looked at Ma, gently rocking and knitting. She thought to herself, this is now. She was glad that the cozy house and Pa and Ma and the firelight and the music were now. They could not be forgotten, she thought, because now is now. It can never be a long time ago. And now we're all gonna cry because that's sad. It's true. It's true what Laura said. She's absolutely right. Because these kind of things that she talks about, it's now. It's always now. And her memories with Mom and Pop was now. And it would never be a long time ago. Because it would still be the same. So someone goes, that's the end? Yes, that's the end. That's the end of Little House in the Big Woods. And she's right. There is only now. And I think we all get that like this week. There's only now. So now is the time to be nice to each other, to call your friends. Do you have like some friends, some people you haven't heard from in a while? You know, get on the phone. Make sure everybody's okay. Call them. There is only now. And there's only that much of this book. I know. Luckily, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote like 9 freaking books. So tomorrow, 1:30, we like 1:30, 1:30 it is. Tomorrow, we're going to start reading the second book of the series, which is Farmer Boy. And that one's really cool because it's all about Almanzo Wilder's childhood. See, Laura didn't have a lot of food growing up. They were very poor, as you have noticed in these books. And these books came out during the Great Depression when, like, everybody was poor and almost no one had enough food. But you see, Almanzo's parents, his family, were not poor. They were very well-to-do farmers, and they had a lot of food. And Laura was fascinated with his childhood stories of these just huge tables full of pie. And so she wrote a whole book about his childhood, like for the little boys. Little girls would read about Laura, and little boys could read about Almanzo. But also everyone during the Great Depression could read about how much food the Wilder family had. So we'll be starting that tomorrow. So you might need a sandwich. You bring like a snack, like a box lunch or something, because it's just going to be talking about food. Tomorrow at 1:30, I will be here, and we will start reading Farmer Boy, and then next week, is it Monday? I don't know. Next week, Dean Butler will start reading from Farmer Boy. It's crazy. And we'll just keep going, and we'll do Little House on the Prairie, and we'll do By the Shores of Silver Lake, and we'll do The Long Winter, and we'll do On the Banks of Plum Creek, where, and we get to Banks of Plum Creek, Nellie shows up. And do I have a wig? I might have a wig. That could happen. I have bonnets. I don't have a lot of bonnets. You guys have ordered so many bonnets. You're crazy. I ordered more bonnets. They're on the way, so it's cool. But if you look at the site, there's books. I got things. I don't know. But you go there. So have fun. Take care of each other. Wash your hands. And I'll see you tomorrow.